Thanks everyone for coming out on a rainy day for our 2024 Studio 178 Artist Talk with Wildriana Paulino. Studio 178 is an annual one-year residency for artists who are either immigrant artists, recent MFA graduates, late career artists, or artists in financial need. Many of our applicants fall into more than one of those categories, and we allow them to self-identify into whatever category they wish. Wildriana is our 5th Artist-in-Residence, and we have just chosen our 6th Artist-in-Residence, who's here with us tonight, or this afternoon, I should say. By way of introduction, Wildriana was born in the Dominican Republic. She is an interdisciplinary artist and educator. She received her BFA in Fine Arts from the Cooper Union School of Art. Wildriana has exhibited her work in various venues, including the Bronx River Art Center and Abrazo Interno Gallery at the Clemente Soto Velaz Cultural Center. In 2022, she participated in the New York Latin American Art Triennial and exhibited Maternity Figure, a life-size installation resulting from her research into femicide, which is the normalized killing of women simply for being women. A 2022 recipient of the Jacques and Natasha Gelman Foundation Prize, Wildriana's collaborations include Women's Strike New York City and the Audubon Society. Last but not least, and probably most importantly, Wildriana has been the 2023-2024 Studio 178 Artist-in-Residence. We have so enjoyed having her with us, and we are so looking forward to hearing more about your work today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff, for that generous introduction, and thank you, everyone, for making it here despite the hard rain. So I would like to begin just by reading a brief extract from my artist statement. Living in a matriarchal household. Yes?
I can hardly hear you.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna raise my voice. Living in a matriarchal household, but being exposed to violence against women every time I step outside was one of my realities while growing up in the Dominican Republic. Drawing inspiration from these experiences, my work examines womanhood through the conundrums of violence, isolation, and absence. It criticizes the normalization of brutality. In search of autonomy and healing, I have framed the female body as earth itself and the violence against it as a transgression of the source from which everything originates and must return. So, as I mentioned in this extract from my statement, my work is informed by my research on femicide, which is, I believe, I like to say, is an epidemic that unfortunately plagues our world, but in the Dominican Republic, it was quite common to see because unfortunately, authorities don't pay much attention to these cases. And once again, femicide is the systematic killing of women for the condition of being women or female biologically. And while I was born in the Dominican Republic, it was something that I saw quite often. But in 2016, I moved to New York specifically. And one of the migrant experiences and effects, I think, is to distance oneself from our country and to look back to every living experience that one had in the native country. And one of these experiences, besides being nostalgic and missing where I came from, was also the high contrast in the way that the justice system works and the way that female representation worked in the New York society in specific. So as I look back, I started to look to the situation through more critical eyes, and inevitably it became part of my practice. So this is the first work that I ever created talking about this topic. And the title is Una para cada una, which translates to English to one for each. So this artwork is a response to some of the femicides that happened in the Dominican Republic in 2019, where 132 women and young children were assassinated for their conditions, and little to almost not justice was made in their names. So I would just like to briefly read a little bit about it. So in 2020, I created an installation titled Una para cada una, which represents a report on femicides that occurred in the Dominican Republic in 2019. During this period, 132 women were murdered, and I created 132 handkerchiefs made from clay to remember the lives of each of these women as something more than numbers. The creation of these pieces aims to remember the victims as human beings, as women, in spite of and also in spite of the intense investigation I made. I couldn't find all of the names of the victims. So here's a close-up image of how these pieces look like. And on each one of the clay pieces, I wrote the names of the victims that I could find, but unfortunately, a lot of the news outlets just report these murders as statistics and numbers, and I even went on searching on some of the government files, and even on the government files, they just mention what age they had, but they don't mention a lot from their identity or even names, especially because a lot of these victims tend to be underage. And as you can see here, this piece it's a little bit more on the infographic side, more on the on what was missing from the news outlets, which were their name. But as I kept working with this topic, I also started experimenting with some other materials. So experimentation with material is one of the most important part of my practice. I don't like to sit down and just work with one thing. I like to see how a material can work in the favor of the tale or story that I'm trying to tell. So I moved away from clay and started working and learning bronze casting. So this is the first project that I have done with bronze casting, which is called Decadencia, translates to English to decadence. And while working on this, first off, it was really tedious because bronze casting, nobody told me that will be that hard. And while I was working with this, I inevitably started to make these little figurines of women, faceless, with open arms, and seem to be wearing what looks like a dress, and yes, so faceless and with only an open mouth, which looks like they're screaming. And while working on this, it was inevitable for me to see the resemblance of these pieces to the Dominican traditional dolls. So these are Dominican traditional dolls, which are called muñecas limé dolls. And these dolls are faceless because they are supposed to represent the diversity of the country. And the only way that they are categorized is by what they're holding. So in this case, they are holding flowers, but sometimes they're holding fruits or holding books of something that represents them. As you can see here, my dolls, they don't hold anything. They have their arms wide open, and instead of holding something, they are screaming. So I started just making 4, and in here, in these dates, you can see that it says from 2020 to 2022, it took a period of over 2 years to make these pieces a reality, and part of it was also thanks to the support of the school corporate union, that they gave me the funds and the access and the technicians to help me create 50 bronze cast images, bronze casting figures. So I would like just to tell you a little bit more about these figures. So these are 50 bronze cast figures of women, and the first time I displayed them, I placed them in the floor this way, kind of creating a wall. Because when I thought about autonomy, when I thought about monuments, I thought about something gigantic that occupied a space. However, something from my practice that I like to do a lot is repetition. I am attracted to making multiples of one thing, because the process of repetition for me is not only a way of meditation, but it's also the way in which I give the time to these individuals who were not given the time by justice. So I spent time creating each one of these pieces. The 50 figures here, the number is not specific to a number like in the previous case, but overall they represent a memoriam for the victims of femicide. Yes. Yeah. So yes, material is very important to me, and as someone who is inclined to experimentation, I kept also experimenting not only from where I drew influence from these dolls, I also then started to look at many of the things around me. So one of the things is that when I was college student, I was also working as a part-time artist assistant for artist George Nelson Preston, who has this amazing African art collection. And I had to work with that collection. I had to catalog it, photograph it, and read about these amazing works. And by learning about African art, of course, it started influencing my own practice, but it also opened my eyes to looking back into my own experience and into the icons that I grew up with. I grew up in a really Catholic household, and one of the images that I saw everywhere was this image, Nuestra Señora de Altagracia, which is Our Lady of Altagracia. She's represented as the Lady of the Dominican people. And I saw her face and image everywhere. So as I was working with teams of femicide and counting the victims and paying attention to each individual, I also kept delving into other aspects of womanhood, because I didn't want to only focus on the violence and isolation and absence that come from it. I also wanted to then, focus on other sides like motherhood and so on. So these images were the start point for that. And these images here are called maternity figures. So they became something that I couldn't shake off me when I started learning about them. So one of the most often motifs in African art is maternity figures. And this is a maternity figure from called Femba, and it's made by the Mayombe people of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And looking at those images again made me think about the Virgin Mary, Altagracia, and all of these icons I grew up with. And as I started looking at them, I said, oh, I want to create my own maternity figure. But I don't want to create just a woman holding a baby. It's beautiful, but I wanted to expand a little bit more and be a little bit more abstract. So as I kept delving into these ideas of womanhood and motherhood, I realized that one of the things that called to my attention the most is how to search for autonomy. Like, how does the women body detaches herself from the violence inflicted by outside influences and grows in and of itself, how to search for autonomy and for self-creation, and that's womanhood. And as I was dealing with those themes and doing research, I also stumbled across paper making. So this was a class offered in my previous school, and paper making, yes, the process of making paper. And I thought that the way that I could give justice to this idea that I had in my mind was actually by utilizing debris and organic materials that are connected to nature. Because when I think about autonomy, the most autonomous being that I know that exists is nature, is Earth. Because right now it's raining. I didn't want it to rain, but nature is doing what she has to do. So I learned the art of paper making, and I created this installation, and just some close-up pictures. So the paper that I utilize for this installation is called abaca, which is a paper, a type of fiber paper native to the Philippines. And I really love this paper because of the special quality that after being beaten for a period of over 9 hours, it becomes really translucent, almost skin-like. And the lighter pieces of papers, they are bleached, but these ones over here, they are not bleached. And when these are dry, air dry, they look almost like a skin. So I created a figura materna, which is a 12 feet high, 10 feet wide installation in the shape of a spiral, where I invite viewers and audiences to come in and walk inside. So in my iteration of a maternity figure, I didn't want to create the child. I wanted the child to be the audience itself entering the womb. And the reason why I also utilize a spiral, which is also one of the images that I use quite often in a lot of my drawings and printing practice, is because the spiral is real. Is known by many Asian culture as a symbol of continuity and of the womb, specifically because of its shape resembling the umbilical cord. And yes, so these are some images, and I really just love how there are a couple of times I have exhibited these works, which have been in the Cooper Union and in the Governor's Island Art Biennial, and in the Bronx River Art Center. I try to make sure that it is near a window, because yeah, part of it is to make people feel like they are in this refuge as they come inside of this artwork, especially because of the way that the paper plays with light. It was really tedious to make this work. It took like 9 months to make it. The work is made by 350 pieces of handmade paper, and that was not the hardest part. The other hardest part was putting it together, which involved hand sewing and using machine, because I wanted to keep the honor of using these natural materials. So I didn't want to just hang it or connect them using glues or synthetic stuff. I went on and created this piece by sewing it together. So besides, as you can see in this picture, besides just creating sheets of paper, I also created body casts from paper, and these are some hands casted, which then hold these other pieces in rows. And here from far away, that's a body cast of myself from like 4 years ago, and still surviving. And I upcycle it to this. And here are some legs around here. Something else is that each paper is unique. Inside of each paper, here, for example, is potting soil. This is potting soil. Some around here have wood. These are dry plants and wool. So each paper in itself has its own unique composition, which is, again, part of my process of creating multiples, but multiples that don't look like each other, so I can give the honor to every single one, because I like printmaking. I like making a lot of things many times, but I don't like making additions. And for those of you who don't know, additions is the process in which you create many things in one thing. I don't like doing that. So yeah. So when I received and when I was honored to get the resident here at Cornerstone Studio, I had already been working for a while on some deeper research on these themes of motherhood, nature, and women, and how I can connect the figure of the woman more with nature. So yeah, these are some of my favorite trees. I forgot to put the happy face. So one of my favorite things that I like to do, especially living in this great neighborhood, is that I like to take walks. I like to go out to Fort Tryon Park and take a hike. And these are some of my favorite trees. I can tell you exactly what they are. And the reasons why these are my favorite is this one because of the protuberance of the tree, and this one because it's a tree coming out of a cut down tree. So I couldn't shake off that image from my mind. And I just then did a little bit of research about this and about this biological thing that happens of plants are nurturing from each other or growing from once. And as I explored these themes, I stumbled upon the concept of parthenogenesis, which is an asexual form of reproduction in which a body can create life without needing external influences or without needing a sperm, and the body is female. So this is one of the first images I created using the influence from my walks in the park. This is also made on handmade paper, a collection of handmade paper that I have had for a while. The paper, it is cotton and potting soil, and it is exploded, the paper, and what I mean by exploded is that this is one of the terms in paper making when you are pressing a lot of pieces of paper. The papers in the bottom will usually explode because of the hydraulic pressure. And nitpicky paper makers don't like this paper. However, I'm not a perfectionist, so I really like them. So I kept them and utilized them to create these ink on paper images. This is titled Árbol que vi a caminar, which translates to tree I saw while walking. So as I kept working on these images, I also then went into parthenogenesis, which, as I said, is an asexual form of reproduction. And in here, I also started to spend more time with ink, and I realized that I still remember how to draw, which is something I didn't know I remember because I spent most of the time just working on more abstract sculptures and images. So it felt nice to go back into drawing, and I feel like this residency and the space that I have here allow me to tap back into my image making skills. So this is a series still in progress, and this is parthenogenesis number 1, 2, and 3. There is a number 4 somewhere in the making. And in these images, as I started to work on them, I just saw these anthropomorphic tree shapes taking on the task of becoming their self, their own source of growth. And somehow some of the branches ended up looking like umbilical cords. And yes. So as I kept working with parthenogenesis and with ink on paper, I also started delving more into more materials because, as I mentioned, materials are a huge important part of my practice, and I miss making three-dimensional things. I miss making something that lies beyond the wall. So I went into some of my old stuff, and I found this copper plate over here. I'm a scavenger. I like to gather materials and let them sit for years until it's time to use them, and that's what happened here. So I had this old copper plate laying around, and I'm also a printmaker. So I found this, but if you know about printmaking, specifically about etching, is that you need a press. And I have access to presses across the city, but I didn't have the time to go around pressing papers, and I wanted something tangible. So I remember this technique, which I have already used in my previous work, which is called plaster etching. So in order to create these images, what you need is a piece of copper, and you make a mold. So this is the mold I created to hold the piece of copper, and plaster. That's why it's called plaster etching. So it essentially works by inking up the plate, putting it onto the mold, and then pouring the plaster on top and praying the lords of printmaking that it comes out good and that you mix the plaster good, because if not, it's gonna rake. So I created a lot of these images, a lot of these copies of plaster molds, but they were just laying in my studio, waiting for me to do something with them besides just casting them. And as I was thinking about what to do with them, I talked to a good friend of mine, and he showed me this picture. This is a painting titled Apollo and Daphne by Italian artist Antonio de Pagliolo. Pardon my pronunciation. And the reason why he showed me this work was because it really reminded him of my Parthenogenesis series. So we met, and he was like, "Oh, I want to show you this. It's really, really interesting. I think you should look more into this Renaissance artist." And I'm like, "Okay." So I took the image, and I read a little bit about Apollo and Daphne. So it turns out that Daphne, she was a nymph, and Apollo was obsessed with her, to say the least, and she was not reciprocating the attention. And in this painting, it's showcasing how Apollo is clutching her and grabbing her, but as he's grabbing her, she's turning into a tree, a laurel tree. So the mythology behind this is that her father was the river god, and that's why you have a river in the background. Her father saw her crying for help, and to escape Apollo, she turned into a tree, which somehow was quite resonant with what I was already working on. And after looking at this image, then I went into the pieces I was working on. So this is the aftermath of casting the plaster. And I also then went over these plaster pieces with some hand-painted elements. And the piece of copper that I was utilizing had a window engraved on it. So I couldn't shake off my head from the laurel, from the imagery of Daphne just running away. So I titled this piece, Daphne Found a Window. It's about like 2 weeks old. So yeah, you are the first people who see it. Yeah, how big? They are this big. Yeah, they are this big. So this is Daphne Found a Window, and these are some other iterations. From that window, a tree grew. And these are some of the details. Daphne Found a Window is a work still in progress. And I just would like to say that yes, so naturally, after learning about this myth, now I'm working on this series, which is currently my latest body of work that relates to trees and nature as a mode of relief, selfhood, and safety. And yes, and this is all. So thank you, everyone.
Take some questions?
Yeah, sure.
So I have a microphone on my lapel. So if anyone has any questions, I'll wander over and stand next to you so we can record the question, and Wildriana can address. Anyone have any questions?
No.
Pastor John.
So I'm interested in the combination of these classical figures, like the Madonna and Daphne, in a sort of new kind of art, and what your thoughts were about that, how you sort of reflected on those traditions, especially given that you started with sort of a how these traditions of women in art sort of inform your work from like very, very ancient ideas that are kind of expressing themselves in different ways.
Thank you. So that's a really good question. I will say the way that Asian traditions of women in art inform my ideas, it's quite in, and a lot of it is research based and focus. However, many times I encounter myself with images like this that people introduce me to. So sometimes it tends to be a little bit sporadic. However, a lot of my work, again, it's, as you can see, influenced by female figures across times and religions and times, religions, and nature. So the way that it influences my work is by being the center of it. It's essentially the center of where I work around, because I think that if it wasn't for these images and influences, a lot of this work will not exist right now. Yeah.
I see a lot of similarities, maybe not subject matter-wise, but a lot of similarities both in your execution and also, I think, in your use of materials between your work and Ana Mendieta's. And I wanted to see if she was somebody that you were inspired by, if you had drawn the connection yourself, and if yes, you talk about that, and if not, who have you drawn on?
Thank you. That's actually a very good question. I love Ana Mendieta. Yeah, but also funny enough, I started paying attention to Ana Mendieta's work after I have already started working with organic debris and potting soils, because one of my old professors saw me drawing a lot of female silhouettes. And they said, oh, you should look to Ana Mendieta. So she is definitely a big influence of mine. And also Remedios Varo, for the more surrealistic imagery, and of course Louis Bourgeois, and also many contemporary artists and women who are Dominican women as well. Yeah.
The exploration of the materials, the subject that you're trying to express is breaking into the material so that way you force it yourself. Really be sure that does it to allow you to guide you rather than it happens away, which those lines can dictate. I'm making this onto.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, because one of the things is that I have got in the comments that people don't know what I'm gonna do next, because I jump from material to material, or from literal images to more abstract images, but it's a response to whatever the art needs. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. No?
Anyone else?
Congratulations. I like how you explained your process and your work. Did I hear correctly that the collection you were cataloging was George Preston? Yes. Could you share a little bit more about what you did and what was your takeaway from that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So yeah, the collection that I was cataloging was George Preston's art collection, African art collection. But I was also his studio assistant, so I was also working with his artwork and like doing inventory and email correspondence, but specifically to his artistic collection of African art. This is actually one of his pieces. I borrowed it from his collection. And what I was doing was cleaning the pieces, conservation, making sure the pieces were in good state. I was also one of the people in the middle when dealers came in or when people were interested in buying or in showcasing these pieces somewhere else around in the country or outside of the country. And I was also responsible for photographing the images. So this one I didn't photograph, but it was, yeah, in the same like high quality image style, hopefully. I was also the one in charge of doing the inventory and doing the research of where are these pieces from, who are the people, what are the ethnic names of these pieces, and also searching for the provenance. So it was that, but he was also a professor of African art. So inevitably, as I worked for him for like over 3 years. He schooled me a lot. He schooled me a lot on African art and on art overall. Yeah.
Do you have more of those ink drawings that you did on the exploded paper? Was that a series?
Yeah, I have. Thank you. Yeah, I have more of them. I have a whole series of them. I just chose this picture here because more or less closer to the trees, but there's a whole bunch of them. Thank you. Thank you.
My voice is pretty loud, so I don't think I can do that. Yeah, so just first of all, a very impressive presentation, and congratulations on a successful year of residency. So going back to slide 3, your work on Decadencia, I was just very intrigued by these 50 bronze figures that you used bronze casting to complete. So a question is from like an outsider's perspective. What kind of framework did you use to calibrate the similarities and differences across these different figures? And assuming that it takes a long time to make every single one of these, what kind of efficiencies did you achieve as you progressed making these figures?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So all of these, they come from a single mold. So I had a single mold, which is rubber and then plaster. And I use a method that is called lost wax, which is a method in which you create a lot of copies, wax copies of them, and then you melt them. You melt the bronze and then pour it in, and the bronze will take the shape of the wax. So essentially, they come from the same mold, but in the process of cutting them and polishing them, each one of them turns out differently. As you can see here, if you look close enough, the amount of shine or patina that they have on top is different, and that's because even though they come from the same mold, the wax lays different in each one of them. Some of them come with air bubbles. I don't have them here, but I had some of them with their heads cut off, with their arms cut off. So that's the way that I calibrate it. It's actually a lot of hoping that it will turn out okay. Because unfortunately, melting metal and hoping that it comes out good is a hard method. And if you look close at each one of them, even though it's hard to these images, yeah, they are quite different. So I wasn't really trying to make them look too different from each other or exactly the same as each other. I went on with each one, treating them the best I could and polishing them the best I was capable to, which was time-taking, but thankfully enough, I had the support of really good metal work technicians who made this possible. Yeah.
Is there a reason why you need 50, or is that just what you felt like doing?
Oh, thank you. So yes, in this work, I specifically made 132 pieces. However, for Decadencia, I only made 50, and 50 was more like a cap number. It's not related with any symbolic figure, unfortunately. And part of 50 was also the amount of time, bronze, and aid that I was able to have to create this. So they're hollow, and because they're hollow, I was able to even create more. Yes.
Do you put the holes in for the mouths?
The mouth, the holes are already created in the first iteration, which is a clay figure that then I make a mold of. So the holes are already part of the wax figures before they melt. But I actually had to go through each one of the mouths and clean off the metal, because many times you have like the closed mouth with metal, and somehow I had to carve it out. I think there's someone.
Thank you. How long this process stood in your mind before you decided to start with it?
Oh, thank you. That's actually a really good question. So, yeah, if you see here, the dates go from 2020 to 2022. So I first started working on them in 2020. And for 1 year, I had to take a hard stop because of many reasons. And in the final months, weeks of 2021, thanks to the support of my school, I was able to get the financial resources to get the bronze and work on this. So I was able to finish it by 2022. So it took over 2 years. But I actually really like that break in between, that 1 year break for this process, because it made me rethink a lot of the things that I wanted to do. Like originally, it was supposed to be a wall, and part of the reason why this is more a wall is to create a monument that doesn't really. It's not high, but it's more wide, because for me, width occupies more space than height. So through that process of waiting, I found out all of these other solutions.
Just a question on the cylindrical formation of the paperwork. So the one with the paper, yeah, down right there. So you mentioned that the papers were created using alpaca. I'm curious, what is that related to, like avocado by any chance? And then the actual paper, you mentioned that they have translucent properties. Does that have anything to do with also like reflecting or capturing, absorbing light?
Yeah, so on your second point, you are right. It does have to do with reflecting and transposing lights, which is one of the things I like to do with my work, because I love the way that the light comes through the window. But the name of the fire is abaca. It's not abac, it's abaca, and abaca is a tree endemic to the Philippines, and it's mainly used to make paper because of its really nice qualities. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to announce that we do have in the house this afternoon our next Studio178 Artist-in-Residence. You heard it here first. Her name is Katya Marovtseva. We look forward to hearing from her about a year from tonight. Thank you all for coming, especially with this rainy weather. The studios are not open tonight, unfortunately, but there is hot cider in the back, so please have some on your way out and stay as long as you like to talk. Thanks very much.
Thank you.